Well, hey, welcome to Pocket Theology. I'm here with my good friend Holly Ruter.
Hi.
And you actually were at church with us on Sunday.
I was. It was fun.
It was a lot of fun. I got to tell you, I actually had several people ask if we would do this again
Awesome.
on a Sunday. I
Yeah.
think we talked about mental health issues, and specifically, you love Jesus.
I do.
And that's one of the things that I was really excited about is here's someone who, I know you're not allowed to say this, and I said this on Sunday, our kids go to see you, and you can neither confirm or deny.
You're
Isn't
right,
that
I
what,
can.
isn't that
I
what
confirm
you
or deny
said?
that.
So I'm confirming and you can deny it, but I'm confirming it. And a part of my story, just to be frank, about 5 years ago, I went to therapy for the first time, did EMDR, some traumatic therapy.
Yeah.
Changed my life.
Yeah.
And I've never been against therapy.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where I didn't think I needed it. Actually, okay, I'll share this story real quick, and then I'd love to hear what got you into this
Field or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so always been a big proponent. I think therapy is helpful. I think medication is helpful. We dealt with those questions on Sunday. I was at an Enneagram conference, and so I don't know if you would what you think about the Enneagram. There's mixed opinions on
Yeah.
it, and
I think my opinions are mixed.
yeah, and I think there's, like all things, if you use it for the right thing, it's a great tool. If you use it for the wrong thing, it can be a tool in the wrong direction, right? If you use a hammer to put in a screw, it's not going to work very
Right.
well. So I was at a training with Ian Morgan Cron. He has the podcast Typology.
Okay.
And I was at a table with a bunch of sevens, and sevens are known for being sometimes Peter Pans, the enthusiasts. We love fun, that kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
So I'm sitting at a table with sevens, and this woman sitting next to me, she's sharing this story. And she goes, she's like, so my friend told me about this concert that we were at, and I argued with her for hours. She's saying this. And I told her, I said, I wasn't at that concert. She goes, yes, you were. I said, no, I wasn't. And she's arguing. And then she showed me a picture, and there I was at the concert.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't remember the concert. And she's like, it's like I wasn't there. And Ian Cron goes, because you weren't. One of the things that sevens do is we're so focused on the next thing, we're not fully present in the current thing. So for whatever reason, where she wasn't present. She was probably thinking about the next fun thing. She wasn't fully engaged. And I totally, I resound with that part.
Yeah.
However, and I don't need to get into details, but I had some pretty heavy trauma in my childhood.
Sure.
And one of the things that a friend of mine who is a counselor, this was years ago, he said, Jason, one of the things that comes with post-traumatic stress disorder is you actually sometimes have hypermemorization to protect yourself. So things trigger you really quickly. So I'm at this conference, and so I raised my hand, and I'm like, well, maybe I'm not a seven because I tend to remember a lot of things. And it was Ian Cron and Beatrice Chestnut, and I don't remember which one of them said it. They goes, well, it's because you're not healed. And I was really offended.
Yeah.
Because part of my testimony is that Jesus took,
And he
by all,
healed you. He saved you. It was, yeah.
yeah, by all accounts, I should not be who or where I am today. And part of my story is look at this work God did. And they're like, don't think you're healing. It's not like healing like you're a bleeding wound all over the place. But they asked the question. They said, St. Paul, so Paul the Apostle, it's believed that he was a pretty ugly man. And the reason was he'd been stoned near death multiple times, shipwrecked, had scars all over his body.
Right.
And they said, what happens if you break a bone and you don't set it correctly? Well, yeah, you're healed in the sense that you're not bleeding anymore, but the bone's at an angle, and every time something triggers
It's not
that.
gonna work the same way.
That's right. And they said, so what happens a lot of times with Christians, and this was the first time I heard about spiritual bypass, completely changed my frame of reference. And they said what happens with Christians is sometimes we use the Bible and faith to not do the work. And so yeah, you're healed, but then things trigger you because you never actually dealt with the wound.
Yeah.
And it was like a brick hit me in the head. And all of a sudden I felt overwhelmed with shame, like I'd been lying for years by telling people I was healed. And I went and talked to them, like, what do I do about this? And they're like, well, we'd highly recommend EMDR. And so I did EMDR for about 8 weeks. I did a coping session with a local therapist and then went through it, and it changed my life.
Yeah.
And it truly, it untangled things inside of me that were triggers that in the past something would happen and it'd trigger me instantly, and I never understood why. And so I've been very upfront with our church community because I think my role as a pastor is I can encourage people to take steps of health by sharing my own journey
Absolutely.
and health. And so we one of the things that I was excited about having you on, because I do think there's still a stigma around mental health
Oh, of course.
and therapists, and I can't tell you how many Christians I know. I'm not seeing a counselor that doesn't work, or it's mumbo jumbo or whatever, or I'll just pray. That's my favorite one. I pray all the time, and God's just going to heal me, which God can. Let's be clear. So that's my journey. I'd love to hear what brought you into counseling.
Actually, it's a little backwards because I never went to like I did go to school originally to be a therapist. I didn't go to school to be a social worker. That was not my frame of mind. I originally went to school to be a teacher.
Really? What grade?
I always knew I wanted to like be with older kids. I love kids, but I don't do well with a lot of kids all at once.
Okay.
So like middle school, high school. And so I went to college to be an English teacher.
Okay. Do you like the English language?
I do.
And
yeah.
grammar and all that stuff?
I love it actually.
That's probably why my daughter enjoys you so much.
I love that stuff.
Okay.
I love proofreading and grammar.
Oh, geez Louise. Okay.
And I love that stuff. So I originally went to school for that. I got into the education classes where you have to actually learn about the groundwork of educational things, and I hated it. And I was like, I can't do this. I do not want to be a teacher. Like, this is not cool. I still love English. So I dropped the education part of my degree and just pursued English. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do with an English degree? That's like really broad. I'm going to graduate and just have this random thing in English. So my plan was to go on and get a master's degree in something and teach at a collegiate level and just do English. And my senior year of college, I can't even really tell you what happened. I do know like my dad worked in human services. He worked at a youth shelter, and I always loved going up there. He worked at a boys' home, and I always loved going up there and just like seeing what they were doing, and always found it interesting. And so my senior year of college, I was like, oh, that stuff's really interesting. Maybe I should look at doing something like that. And so it's like I said, this is really backwards. I dropped one of my classes so that I wouldn't graduate. I know. It's really, right. I purposefully didn't graduate.
Okay.
So that I could add an extra year onto school. Because if I were to graduate, then I wouldn't get financial aid the next year.
Oh, okay. Yep. I know the logic, because so I did education in my 30s. Mm-hmm. And so they did offer financial aid, but not the same when I did my master's program.
Yeah.
It was grants and all kinds of other stuff. Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't get any of that stuff if I were to graduate and then keep going.
Okay.
So I didn't graduate, and I just added an extra year, and I was almost done with the English degree. So I just kept going with that too. And then I just added psychology.
Okay.
And so I double majored in psychology and English. And I was a music minor, and then I dropped the music minor. And so all of those things combined with the music, the education, the English, and the psychology, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology, a bachelor's degree in English, and a minor in humanities. Apparently, when you just add a whole bunch of things together, they come up with other degrees and say, you qualify for this.
Yeah.
So I have a minor in humanities.
Which I love. Okay, so I'm horrible at hard sciences. So math, biology, soft sciences, humanities, philosophy, even elements of psychology.
Yeah.
I really enjoy things where there's flexibility. Yeah.
So I have a minor in humanities.
Okay.
And I was like, I didn't do anything to get that besides take a bunch of random
You
classes.
just got it. That's awesome.
They were like, here, have this degree. And I was like, okay. So then I worked for a year because I wanted to go get my master's in social work. And I worked for a year, and I started working like with DHS in foster care and did in-home services and supervised visits and that kind of stuff for a couple of years, and then went back for my master's. And
And how long have you been practicing then?
Well, let's see. I graduated with my master's degree on May 9th of 2011, and I gave birth to my son on May 13th.
Okay. So I think I graduated my MDiv 2013. 2012, somewhere around there. I don't even remember.
Uh-huh.
I don't even have my certificate. Like, I don't even know where it is.
Oh,
I just don't care.
yeah.
I know I did it. I
Yeah.
did that thing, right?
You're like, I know I have it somewhere.
I have this. I'm Masters of Divinity, and I'm like,
it's
it's
great.
it's there, yeah.
Yeah.
And now, faith-wise, were you raised in the church? Came to Christ later? What's
No, I always went to church growing up. My parents,
okay?
we were Lutheran,
Okay.
and so I went to a
The
Lutheran.
Lutherans like us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I was raised in a Lutheran church, and really small church. I mean, and I'm from Rake, Iowa. I don't know if you've ever heard of Rake,
No.
Iowa. Right. 250 people.
Okay.
Super small Norwegian town.
Okay. Good. That explains the Lutheran.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
And what's your maiden name? Are you Norwegian?
my maiden name is Mayland.
Is that I don't know what that is.
It's German.
It's German. Okay.
Because my dad was German. My mom is a Winter, and she's more of the Norwegian side.
Okay.
But yeah, we had like a lutefisk supper every year.
Do you like lutefisk?
No.
Okay. I can't even stomach the idea of it.
No.
It's just gelatinous goo.
Yeah, but I mean, lots of Oli and Lena jokes.
Yep.
And
Oli.
Oli and Lena.
So I lived in Minnesota for 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason why I know it. The oofta and all
Yeah.
the I don't other
Ultra
than that.
mega.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, let's get in. So what we're gonna do today, we had several questions that came in.
Yeah.
And then there were some that I know I've been asked. And again, I'll talk about the theology side, but I'd love to hear your theology side as somebody who loves Jesus, is passionate about God's word. So Jaden, who's off camera today, I actually said, hey, I thought you were going to be in the camera. And he's like, I am, but I'm not going to be on the camera. So he's just going to be like a disembodied voice.
Yeah, I'm flying in all the way from the other side of the room today.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So
Should we pretend like he's not in the room and like where's that voice
Yes.
coming from?
yeah, and then we'll unmask him at the end,
I have
and it wasn't
questions
one of those
to
darn
ask.
kids. Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
Scooby-Doo reference right there. So we've got some questions, and my hope is, I mean, again, on Sunday I had several people who were like, "Are you going to do this again?" Because I think it is such a pressing topic right now.
Yeah.
And I think we're now seeing the effects of things, but not even just COVID, but
Right.
social media. I mean, it has just been a storm of things that have kind of come together over the last probably 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
I think mental health in our kids is on a rise. I think mental health within adults on a rise. I even think about, like, last week we talked about the conflict in the Middle East. There are individuals that they're really anxious about this.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
And so there's a lot of anxiety and fear, and I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad, but I think there's a mental health crisis going on in the United States because of so many different factors. And at some point, if we have a chance, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm a big fan of Preston Sprinkle. He has Theology on the Raw, Gender for Faith and Sexuality.
Okay.
And he talks about rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Okay.
And how we're seeing this more and more in our culture today. And love to hear your thoughts on that if we get to
Sure.
it. We've got more pressing questions, but I want to kind of put that out there. So if we have time, we get to it. All right, Jaden, hit us.
All right.
No, well, literally don't literally hit
hit
us.
us.
Hit us with the questions.
I'm too far away to hit you. All right, so question number 1. If I were to say that someone is really intelligent, our culture would tend to praise this. But if I were to say someone is really emotional, it would seem that people think this is a bad thing.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is?
Personally, I think it's because emotions a lot of times are seen as negative.
Yeah.
Like usually when we talk about emotions, we're talking about, sadness, anger, but we forget that emotions include happiness and joy and just being enthusiastic. If somebody's I would say I always describe my daughter as being a really emotional person.
Yeah.
And I don't mean it as a negative, but she does have overly negative emotions too. But she's also really emotional in everything she does. Everything is just really big. Everything is just big with her. She's really highly emotional. So I think the reason that it's seen as a bad thing is because they're associating the word emotional with negative.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be though.
Yeah. I think so. A little interesting history. So if we look at Eastern mentality, Eastern thought way of thinking versus Western thought, Western is focused on thinking and the intelligence. So Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Plutarch, all those guys, right? Is Plutarch an actual person, or is that from Hunger Games. I don't remember.
I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So I was like,
He was a writer.
Plutarch was a person.
Yeah, Philip, but it sounds like a Hunger Games reference,
I was
doesn't
like,
it?
I don't know who that person is. Okay.
Western, we elevate the mind and intelligence where, and it's not that in Hebrew thinking they don't, it's that they see things more communally. And I think emotional tends to be more communal in nature, whereas intellect is something I have.
Yeah.
And I think the other hard part is that even biblically, Paul tells us knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. And
Yeah.
love is an emotion, but it's also a choice. It's more than just an emotion. And I think that part of it is usually our experience with emotions are negative.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Even our own. Like, I don't think about my emotions until they're bad. And then once I have an emotion and I'm like, oh, I don't like that, rather shame, anger, guilt, whatever else it is.
Or we remember the negative so much more. Like the positive things, we're like, oh, that's so good. But then that's gone, But then the negative thing, it just stays with you forever.
Yeah. And, well, I just recently read a study that was talking about the power of words and how they're actually now, and again, this is your field. So if I'm crossing or if I'm wrong, you can say, you're wrong, Jason, and I won't be offended at all. But the article was saying that there's new research that is showing that verbal abuse actually has longer term effects and sometimes more detrimental than even physical or sexual abuse. Tell me about what happens in verbal abuse or emotional abuse, because that is a part of us.
Yeah.
I think sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Right. But they do.
And I was talking with somebody else about this week is, when I cut myself, my body has a natural defense that goes in and it creates
But we have to actually do something to change the emotional part of it, right?
Yes.
Like it's not necessarily natural.
It's not autonomic. Like my body wants to heal itself. My brain does not.
Right.
And so how do you, as you're working with patients, and again, I know you have to be careful with confidentiality and all that. How do you encourage people, either one who want to flee from emotions, i.e. me, I'm not a big fan of emotions, or people who maybe don't want to confront their emotions? And then on the flip side, what about the person who owns their emotions too much and their emotions have full control? Because I think that is part of the reason why we think of emotion. Someone who's emotional is bad is they're usually overly controlled by their emotions. How do you encourage, or what's kind of your approach?
Well, I think this kind of fits in with what, like Jane was asking about the whole, intelligence and emotion. So in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy.
P.S. Whenever you say acronyms, please make sure to say what they are.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have guys like me, I'm like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. Dialectical behavioral therapy. So there's the 3 states of mind.
Okay.
And I think it's a really awesome tool that anybody, so DBT skills actually are really, really awesome for anybody, not just somebody who's in therapy, but just I use DBT skills in everyday life.
Yeah.
But the 3 states of mind, they talk about the emotional mind, reasonable mind, and wise mind.
Okay.
And so reasonable-minded people, we all kind of tend to be one or the other, either a reasonable or an emotional mind. We tend to be one type of person. I'm more of an emotional type person. So I base a lot of things, decisions and thoughts based more on emotion than I do on fact.
So I'm more reasonable minded.
Right.
I tend to think through logically, like, yep, okay.
Yep. And so that would be my husband. He is much more of a reasonably minded person. And so we tend to lean towards one or the other. And so if you can kind of figure that out, am I more of a reasonable minded person or am I more of an emotional minded person? Do I base more things off emotion or fact?
Do you think, you're in English, you went English major.
Yeah.
Do you think even just using the word reasonable minded
I was thinking the same
has
thing.
has a more positive nomenclature to it?
Yeah.
Oh man,
Yeah.
that's hard.
I didn't even think about that. For sure.
It's kind of hard.
Yeah. But yeah, so when you bring them together then, if you can say, okay, I am a more emotional minded person. So I think based on emotion, and then you have a situation that you're coming up to and you know this about yourself. So I always draw like this little Venn diagram. You know, like people who aren't actually watching it and only listening, you could see my hands moving all over the place. But so like I draw the little circles, and when they overlap, that's where that 3rd state of mind comes in, and that's the wise mind.
Okay.
Because you need both emotion and fact. You need the reason and you need the emotion. And like, so the best, this is the example I always give in my office. So I apologize if you're my client and you've heard me say this before, that if you went to the doctor's office and they had to give you a diagnosis of something, if you have something terminal, a reasonable minded person who had no emotion is going to walk in and be like, so you have cancer, you have 6 months to live, you should probably get your affairs in order. Why don't you come back next week and we can talk about other things. All right, see you later. Done. Facts, over, walked out the door.
Yeah.
The emotional person who has like no factual things is going to come in and be very like, I'm so sorry, I don't even know how to tell you this. This just breaks my heart. It's so hard. Oh, and then they can't even get the words out because all they're doing is thinking with emotion.
Okay.
But the doctor who has both, which most doctors are pretty wise-minded people, they can come in and they can have both. They can give you the facts. Hey, listen, this is what's going on. This is what we found. I feel for you. Is there anybody else you want me to call? How can I help you? Yep. And they're, they have the emotion there, but they also have the facts mixed in with it. So somebody who's always on their emotion needs to be able to kind of like pull the fact in. And somebody who avoids the emotion, they can look at the facts and say, am I only thinking facts?
I mean, that is something that we use as like a developmental measurement, is what is someone's emotional intelligence?
Well, yeah. So, I do coaching, leadership coaching for things like Enneagram. And recently I moved away from focusing on the Enneagram to self-awareness. Mm-hmm. Because for years, I always thought the goal of self-awareness is so that I could list what was going on inside of me.
Yeah.
And what I'm discovering is that, no, the real goal of self-awareness is so that I understand how I affect other
people. Mm-hmm.
That's right? That's real self-awareness. Yeah. And that goes back.
It's a combination of it all.
Yes.
Right?
I still need to know what's going on inside of me, because then I'll know why I'm affecting
other people.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, again, I'm I wouldn't say fact. I mean, I do have emotions, but I don't like them. Mm-hmm. So I tend to run.
Like to go away from.
Yeah, I tend to run away. Like I'm the guy, like at a commercial will come on and I'll get, if I could suck the tear back up into my eye, I would. That'd be me. But the work I've been doing in the last 5 years is learning to acknowledge my emotions and my emotional needs. Mm-hmm. And that's tough. Like I came to my wife, well, this was probably 5 years ago now. And I said, I know you love me, but I don't think you care about my needs.
Okay.
And just even admitting that, I felt so horrible saying that to her. And she's like, now her response is the funny part. She goes, but you don't have any needs.
Oh.
And
you're like, right, because I've never said them
that's
and
right.
verbalized them. You're
and then
right.
so in 20 years of marriage or 18 years of marriage at that point, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm having to express these things. Well, that means I actually have to be in touch with my needs, which my needs, intellectually, I know my needs are physical, emotional, right? I know that mentally, but actually feeling my needs and going, this is what I need in this moment is hard for me. Mm-hmm. And so I've had to work to find that. And I say work because it's not natural.
Right, it's not easy. It doesn't just come.
Yeah, because I just kind of move away from it, or I run away from it, or you're like, give me something fun to do.
Yeah.
Right? When as you're looking at that, in our culture, I think emotional intelligence is so critical. Obviously in kids, this is hard. Mm-hmm. Because particularly with kids, my understanding, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is the frontal part of the brain doesn't get formed. The executive part isn't formed until they're like late 20s at this point now. Mm-hmm.
And girls are before boys. Just wanted to point that out.
Well, yeah, that's because boys are dumb, and I'll be the first to admit it. But I mean, I remember it used to be adolescence was extended in like 19 to 20 when I was a kid, and now they're saying like 26 to 27.
Yeah, for sure. And there's even some people who say it's later, but yeah. I think generally most of the research says 26, 27.
And how much of that from a social, okay, now this is why I think this is a good conversation. How much of that is because of the stress that's going on, that we're not actually giving kids safe environments to develop those skills? Either one, because we're overprotecting, which I know that's a whole different conversation. Yeah. Or we allow them to experience trauma, and because of that trauma, they're not able. And so I think, quite frankly, social media can be a traumatic thing for kids.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So how does that affect that emotional intelligence?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think this is it's always been the case that when you go through any type of trauma that affects you emotionally, it can stunt your emotional growth, right? So, I mean, it doesn't, like brain development doesn't necessarily affect whether or not it's going to be stunted, whether it's going to completed when you're 19, 20, or 25. I mean, if your emotional growth is stunted from trauma, it's going to happen. And I think we are affected so much. I think trauma, okay, so back up, when I talk about trauma is just any type of situation or an experience that affects you. And it doesn't have to be this big, huge event.
Yeah.
Like there are big T's and there are little T's.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's a big events that do happen and they're trauma, but little T's are small things that happen, and they can just, happen periodically. They can happen in long periods of time, lots of different things. And I think even social media has a lot of traumatic things on it,
Well, I mean, look at how many, you were hearing stories about kids who commit suicide.
At 11.
Because of social media, because their friends, someone liked them or did a hate video or whatever.
Right.
This is actually really great for the second question.
Yeah, bring it in.
Oh, should we actually answer questions?
Yeah. Well, you guys already are.
Okay,
the
perfect.
second question is, how can faith help someone work through trauma?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of on that same level. Like, I mean, trauma, I think I have to think about that, because trauma itself, I am a trauma therapist. That is what I do. It's my forte. But when
I didn't know that. I learned something new today.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes, it is it's really hard for me when I describe it, because I typically say words that don't make sense. Like I say things like, I really love trauma. And then,
I really love trauma. That's why you like murder podcasts.
Right.
It's all coming
Right.
full circle. All
Right.
full circle now.
right, I say things like that, and then I back up and go, no, it's not I love trauma. Like, I don't love trauma. But no, trauma is like, I love working with trauma. That is what I love to deal with.
It's what you're passionate about.
It is.
I fight fires. I have to love fire a
Right,
little
you
bit.
love fire.
Right.
But you don't love fire.
I tell people to
Yes.
embrace their sinfulness. It doesn't mean I'm saying that you're like, yes, it is awesome.
Right. Right. So I'm very passionate about trauma. And I think there are aspects, just like anything, not just trauma, but I think anything. I think sin, I think depression, anxiety, I think anything like that faith part of it plays a lot into it. You praying and talking about it and scripture, and I think that it plays the same role.
Yeah.
But then I also think when you have trauma, you have to do all the other stuff too,
The
like
work.
EMDR.
Yeah.
Because I'm also, I don't know if you know that, but I also am trained in EMDR. Like
I've heard that.
yes. So and actually, maybe, have you ever heard of Flash?
No.
So I don't know if it's really new or but I was recently trained in Flash technique, which is kind of a carry-on from EMDR.
Okay.
Because what more research has found is that when you are doing EMDR, that you are really sometimes being put into a hyper aroused state, because
Yes.
you are discussing your trauma,
Yep.
and it can be very emotional. And so what they have done is they've done some research on how much benefit there is to being in that hyper aroused state and having that bilateral stimulation, as opposed to when you are much lower and you are at a calm state.
Yeah.
And so with the Flash technique, we continue to use the bilateral stimulation, and we enter the trauma by briefly exposing you to the trauma,
Okay.
then pulling you out of it. And then we just talk about your dog or your cat or
Interesting.
something that you love, something very calming, while using bilateral. And then a flash of the eye, you just blink your eyelids 4 times, 5 times, and we continue bilateral. And then you come back to that trauma, and recheck, just like EMDR.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back, let's recheck, and we go back to it and check where your body is and do all that kind of stuff. So
This is part 1 of a 2-part series. We've actually had a wonderful conversation with Miss Holly Ruter from Minds That Matter Counseling here in Clear Lake. Did I get it right?
Yep.
Awesome. And so thank you for tuning in. We're going to have a great Q&A, and there's going to be a part 2, so look forward to that one as well.